The first snowflakes of winter drifted down as dusk settled over the remote mountain settlement. Three travelers emerged from the dark line of the forest, their wagon moving with a deliberate silence against the growing quiet of the evening. The man in the lead possessed a gaunt leanness, his gestures sharp and economical. Beside him, a woman held herself with a preternatural stillness, her expression a mask of serene composure. The third, handling the reins, scanned their surroundings with a detached, analytical calm. Liam Croft stepped from the heat of his forge into the biting cold. He watched the strangers halt their wagon outside the general store. Their fine clothing and pristine vehicle set them apart from the usual traders. The lean man descended, his boots leaving the faintest impressions in the fresh dusting of snow. He introduced his group as seekers of religious refuge. His words were carefully chosen, delivered with a dispassionate clarity that felt more clinical than spiritual. Liam offered a slow nod, the customary welcome in that isolated place. Yet, his instincts, honed by years of judging metal and men, stirred with unease. The woman's smile was placid, but it never warmed her distant eyes. The silent driver observed the small gathering of townsfolk not with curiosity, but with the assessing gaze of a man inventorying resources. Their polished demeanor clashed with the wilderness, creating a dissonance that set Liam's nerves on edge. Inside the general store, the air was thick with wood smoke and the scent of dried apples. The settlement's elders had gathered around the potbelly stove, their faces weathered and cautious. Liam stood among them, a solid presence as Dr. Alastair Finch presented his case. Finch laid out documents on a barrel top, their official seals and elegant script suggesting European provenance. Sister Helena offered a benign smile, her hands folded as if in prayer. Mr. Theron Gray lingered near the doorway, his quiet attention cataloging the room and its occupants. Finch spoke of purchasing a specific, barren tract of land. He described its boundaries and isolation with an accuracy that felt intrusive. The monetary offer was startlingly generous, a sum that promised to ease the harshness of the coming winter. Liam watched the elders exchange glances, their practical needs warring with deep-seated suspicion. The promise of security was a powerful lure. One by one, their reservations yielded. The transaction proceeded with a handshake, settled by collective necessity. Liam remained silent, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. Later, under a sky bruised with twilight, Liam helped unload the heavy wagon, his muscles strained against the odd weight and shape of the crates. The three newcomers worked with a quiet, synchronized efficiency that spoke of long practice. Mr. Gray handled a long, cylindrical case with particular care. Its contents shifted with a faint, metallic clatter. As Liam adjusted another crate, the canvas wrapping slipped. Beneath it, he glimpsed a detailed architectural drawing. The lines were precise, showing a wall section of extraordinary thickness. Annotations specified iron reinforcement. Dr. Finch appeared at his elbow almost immediately. His voice was smooth as he explained the need for thick walls to ensure silence for deep contemplation. He spoke of creating a pure space insulated from the world. Liam nodded along, but his eyes were drawn back to the plans. He caught sight of another diagram, a complex network of drains and pipes that seemed excessive for a simple sanctuary. It looked more like the plumbing for an infirmary. The doctor's words about purity now felt like a thin veneer laid over a darker purpose. A chill seeped into Liam's bones, one that had nothing to do with the falling temperature. This building was not designed for peace. Its very blueprint whispered of containment. He knew then that something far more ominous than prayer was planned for that desolate piece of land. Winter reluctantly loosened its grip on the mountain clearing. Patches of snow clung to the shadows beneath the trees. The first spring sun felt weak on the laborers' shoulders as they broke the hard ground. The rhythmic thud of picks and shovels echoed where only wind had whispered before. Dr. Alastair Finch watched the excavation from a slight rise. His stance was rigid, his observation clinical. He measured the depth of trenches with the critical eye of a man assessing a surgical incision. Liam Croft's wagon rattled into the clearing, laden with custom metalwork. The sheer weight of the reinforced doors he and his son unloaded spoke of security, not sanctuary. Sister Helena moved through the site with unsettling grace. She offered quiet praise, framing the grueling work as a sacred duty to create a haven. Her serene smile was a permanent fixture. Her talk of peaceful contemplation was often cut short by Dr. Finch's sharp corrections. He would demand a deeper footing or cite engineering principles like load-bearing capacity. The gap between her spiritual refuge and his technical fortress grew wider with every stone laid. The workers noticed the peculiarities. They saw the strangely angled foundations and the deep footings meant for multiple subterranean levels. They exchanged uneasy glances but kept their thoughts to themselves. When dusk approached, Mr. Theron Grey appeared silently. He distributed wages from a heavy leather purse. The coins he gave were more than double the usual rate. That generous weight was a powerful answer to any unspoken questions, a payment for sweat and for silence. Liam accepted his share, the metal cool in his palm. He looked from the coins to the growing outline of the basement levels. A quiet dread, first seeded months ago, tightened in his chest. By summer, the stone walls rose with a disquieting speed. They were built for function, not form. The lower levels were windowless, their surfaces sheer and unforgiving. Liam returned with another delivery of iron fixtures. The massive hinges and complex locking bars he had forged now found their purpose on doors clearly designed to keep something in. He watched Mr. Grey supervise the installation of a thick, matted material between the inner and outer walls. Gray's instructions were sparse as he tested the insulation, ensuring no flaw would allow sound to escape. The operation had the quiet efficiency of a military outpost. The deepest excavation held Liam's grim fascination. Workers finished the lowest basement, its floor carved with narrow drainage channels. Stone benches were being set into a semicircular rise. The layout was unmistakably that of a medical observation gallery, not a place for prayer. When Dr. Finch passed by, Liam gestured toward the pit. He voiced his observation carefully, questioning the need for such a clinical design. Finch offered a thin smile. The balance of humors requires precise environmental control, he explained, his justification feeling both scholarly and utterly hollow. Before Liam could reply, Finch pressed an unexpectedly heavy purse into his hand. The bonus was a clear transaction, purchasing his continued compliance. Liam felt the shift within himself the moment his suspicion was monetized. By autumn, the structure was complete. It stood against the wilderness like a grim sentinel of gray stone. Liam stood with the three leaders for a final inspection. Dr. Finch ran a hand over a perfect joint in the masonry, giving a slight nod of satisfaction. Mr. Grey tested the main door, its swing silent and impossibly heavy. Sister Helena surveyed the grounds from a central watchtower that overlooked a barren yard, not a garden. Dr. Finch turned, his voice calm and final. He declared the sanctuary ready to receive its first patients for healing. The construction phase was over. The true purpose of the place was about to begin. Liam accepted the final, bulging purse, The weight of it was immense, a sum that would secure his family's future. He pocketed the coins, their clinking sound like a series of small, final locks. He walked away without looking back, focusing on the comfort the money would bring, deliberately pushing the image of those high, barred windows from his mind. The carriage wheels crunched over the gravel drive, a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet clearing. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words. Mrs. Caldwell fussed with her daughter's collar, though it was perfectly straight. Her husband stared ahead at the imposing stone building, his expression rigid. Sister Helena descended the steps to greet them. Her dark robes absorbed the pale autumn light. She spoke in low, soothing tones about peace and spiritual renewal. It was a performance of serene welcome, carefully rehearsed. The financial matter was settled with a quiet handshake, the exchange of a heavy envelope for a simple nod. The transaction was over in a moment, a businesslike conclusion to a difficult decision. Abigail Caldwell watched from a few steps away, a silent observer to the arrangement that would define her future. She saw the relief on her parents' faces, war with the cold knot of fear in her own stomach. Her father could not look at her as he turned back toward the carriage. Her mother's embrace was a fleeting, frantic thing. Then the carriage door closed with a decisive thud. The vehicle pulled away, its sound soon swallowed by the forest. Abigail stood alone on the steps, the great building looming behind her. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress. Sister Helena placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The touch was light, yet it felt like a chain. The large wooden door swung inward, revealing a deep shadows within. A few days later, Dr. Julian Moss made the same journey. He carried his medical bag, a familiar weight in his hand. Dr. Alastair Finch answered his knock, offering a thin, professional smile. He welcomed the town physician inside without delay. The entrance hall was hushed and dimly lit, suggesting a place of contemplation. But Finch quickly guided him deeper into the building. The environment changed abruptly. Harsh, electric lights illuminated whitewashed corridors. The air held the sterile tang of chemical cleaners. Finch led him past rooms filled with whirring, unfamiliar machinery. He pointed out devices Moss had only seen in medical journals from Vienna. The doctor's initial curiosity quickly turned to admiration. The sheer order and advanced technology spoke of a brilliant, disciplined operation. They stopped before a reinforced door without a window. Finch's tone became direct and businesslike. He proposed a generous retainer for Moss's consulting services. The sum mentioned would erase the financial pressures of his country practice. A flicker of unease passed through the doctor. He wondered briefly about the source of such lavish funding, but the thought was quickly buried beneath a wave of professional ambition. He saw this as a unique scientific opportunity, the eerie quiet of the halls, the absence of any patients. He chalked up to superior efficiency. He shook Finch's hand, sealing the agreement. Abigail, meanwhile, was led into a room that blurred the line between chapel and clinic. The scent of beeswax candles mixed with the odor of polished steel. Religious icons shared space with medical instruments laid out on a clean cloth. Mr. Theron Gray stood waiting. His face was impassive, his hands spotless. He gestured to a plain, sturdy chair. Abigail sat down, her eyes darting from a wooden cross to the array of tools. The assessment began with quiet intensity. Gray's touch was cool and impersonal as he used calipers to measure her skull. He held a vibrating tuning fork to her ear and watched her pupils track a swinging pocket watch. Abigail softly noted that this felt very physical for a spiritual healing. She had anticipated guidance, not measurement. Sister Helena moved to her side with a comforting smile. She explained that the body was the vessel of the soul, and understanding its structure was the first step toward purification. Her words were meant to be reassuring, yet they sounded thin against the cold metal of the calipers and the intense way Gray recorded his findings in a large ledger. The examination grew more invasive. Her reflexes were tested. Her sensitivity to various stimuli was meticulously documented. Abigail felt herself receding, becoming a set of data points in a ledger. She was no longer a woman, but a subject. The session concluded with the soft sound of the ledger closing. The initial evaluation was complete. Abigail Caldwell had been officially processed, her transition from a person to a patient now firmly underway. The sharp scent of pine and frozen earth filled Silas Croft's nostrils. Each exhale plumed in the frigid air, a small ghost against the deepening twilight. His movements were a study in quiet efficiency, his gaze locked on the dark droplets staining the snow. The wounded buck was a substantial prize, one that would feed his family for a week. But the trail was leading him perilously close to the stone sanctuary, a place his father had always warned him to avoid. The trees began to thin. Ahead, the imposing silhouette of the sanctuary cut a sharp outline against the hunter's moon, a name that now felt ominously fitting. A primal unease tightened his shoulders. The deer, however, was stumbling directly toward the building's rear, its lifeblood painting a clear path on the frosted ground. The hunter in him won out over the superstitious boy. He would be quick. He would be silent. He emerged from the tree line, the open space making him feel exposed. The trail descended slightly, following a natural gully that ran along the foundation. The blood spots became smears on fallen leaves, then vanished entirely near a depression where the hill met the sanatorium's stone base. The animal was gone. Frustration warred with relief. His hunt was over. As he crouched to investigate, a sliver of unnatural light caught his eye. It came from a narrow, grime-clouded window set just above the ground. The light was too white, too bright for candlelight. Curiosity, that old trap for hunters and prey alike, took hold. He crept forward, his boots making no sound on the frozen leaves. He lowered himself to his stomach, the cold of the earth seeping through his heavy coat. Peering through a clean patch of glass, he saw a scene that made no sense. The room below was a stark, bright space of white tiles and polished metal. It looked nothing like the spiritual retreat it purported to be. It resembled a blacksmith's forge crossed with an apothecary's workshop, all cold efficiency. Several figures moved with purpose around a central table. A woman was restrained upon it, her head clamped in a metal frame. Silas's breath hitched. He knew her. It was Mara, the cooper's daughter. Just last week, he had seen her laughing in the market, her voice full of spirit. Now, her face was a mask of silent terror. The two men attending her wore heavy leather aprons stained with dark patches. One held a complex tool that whirred with a low mechanical hum. Their conversation was a quiet, technical murmur. One mentioned the need for precise calibration. The other spoke of severing a neural pathway to achieve behavioral modification. The words were cold, devoid of any spiritual meaning. They discussed her mind as a farmer might discuss a faulty piece of machinery. The man with the tool leaned over Mara. The whirring pitch changed. Silas saw the man's arm tense with pressure. A horror, colder than the winter ground, washed through him. This was not healing. This was alteration. This was a violation performed with a chilling, methodical detachment. The sanctuary's serene facade crumbled in his mind, revealing the monstrous reality it concealed. His simple world of hunting, family, and seasonal routines fractured. He scrambled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs. A root caught his boot and he fell hard, the impact jarring his bones. He pushed himself up and plunged into the woods, crashing through undergrowth without a hunter's care. The peaceful night now felt like a malevolent witness. The moon, once a guide, seemed to illuminate him for unseen watchers. He had to tell someone. The thought was a fever in his brain, but the faces of the town elders surfaced in his memory, their expressions of reverence whenever the sanctuary was mentioned. Who would believe a woodsman's word against that of the esteemed practitioners? His testimony would be dismissed as the ravings of a superstitious hunter. He slowed his pace as the flickering lights of the settlement appeared through the trees. The weight of his knowledge settled upon him, a heavier burden than any deer he had ever carried. He could not unsee what he had witnessed. He knew with a grim certainty that his silence would make him complicit. The truth had found a witness in the woods, and a witness had a duty to speak. The forge felt like a different world from the frozen woods. Liam Croft worked the bellows, his movements a steady rhythm against the winter's bite. The heavy door groaned open. Silas stood on the threshold, a stark silhouette against the grey afternoon light. This was not the young man who had left that morning. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that seemed to hollow him out from within. He stumbled into the warmth, his breathing ragged. He clutched his father's arm, his grip desperately tight. Words tumbled out in a frightened rush. He spoke of the sanctuary, of a grimy basement window and a scene of stark white light inside. He described a woman restrained on a table, her identity clear to him. His voice broke as he repeated the cold, clinical phrases he had overheard, words about severing pathways that had nothing to do with healing. Liam listened, his initial reaction one of practical disbelief. He wiped his soot-stained hands on his apron. The sanctuary was a respected institution. He tried to gentle his son, suggesting the dark and the cold could play tricks on anyone. But the sheer horror in Silas's eyes was undeniable. It was the shock of witnessing something fundamentally wrong. Liam felt the solid ground of his own understanding begin to crumble. With a heavy sigh, he banked the forge's fire. The orange glow faded, leaving the shop in a deepening gloom. He told Silas they would go to the sheriff. The decision settled between them, cold and final. The meeting hall was a place of austere authority. Silas stood with his father and the sheriff facing Dr. Finch and Sister Helena across a broad oak table. He repeated his story, his words sounding thin and strange in the formal silence. Dr. Finch listened with an expression of polite concern. He offered a calm, theological explanation. He spoke of sacred rites that purified the soul, suggesting an untrained observer might misunderstand deep spiritual symbolism. Sister Helena offered a serene smile, gently implying the wilderness could stir a young man's imagination. Then Dr. Julian Moss entered the room, his presence shifting its balance. After hearing a summary of the claims, he dismissed them with the easy authority of a medical professional. He suggested a waking dream, a hallucination born from fatigue and exposure. The sheriff, who had seemed uncertain, visibly relaxed at this diagnosis. The collective weight of their respectable doubt pressed down on Silas, silencing him more effectively than any command. Later, alone in his office, the sheriff felt a nagging unease. He unlocked a drawer and retrieved a heavy ledger. His thick finger traced columns of neat script. His own office's budget showed regular, substantial deposits from the stone sanctuary. Another page listed consistent payments to Dr. Moss, each noted as a consultation fee. He found the doctor at his practice and laid the open ledger on the clean desk. Dr. Moss glanced at the entries without a change in expression. He calmly explained the payments as simple operational support for a vital community institution. His own fees were for legitimate medical oversight. The sheriff heard the words, but they now sounded like a carefully rehearsed script. He saw the unspoken truth. The institution's financial health was woven into the town's own survival. Its stability guaranteed their stability. He returned to his office, the ledger feeling like a heavy weight. He picked up the report concerning the hunter's claims. His pen hesitated for a long moment. Then, with a slow and deliberate hand, he wrote the word "unfounded" across the page. He closed the file, choosing the fragile peace of the settlement over a single disruptive truth. Liam Croft stood in his kitchen, the room's usual warmth absent. The sturdy oak table seemed to represent the heavy choice that had been made. He had seen the conflict in the sheriff's eyes. The official dismissal was a quiet burial. Silas entered, his expression a mixture of fading hope and dawning realization. Liam did not offer empty comfort. He spoke with a grim finality. He explained the situation not as a matter of belief, but of cold reality. The sanctuary's influence was financial. Its fees were the lifeblood for many families. To challenge it was to risk everything. Silas began to object, but Liam raised a hand. His voice was a low, firm command. "We will not speak of this again." The words were a door slammed shut. In that moment, the father who valued truth was replaced by a man who understood its terrible cost. He chose to protect his son's future by accepting a painful silence, building a wall around the truth to keep their world from crumbling. The Ashton family's carriage looked foreign against the local landscape. Its polished black lacquer seemed to absorb the fading evening light. Dr. Alistair Finch observed its arrival from his window with a cool, analytical eye. He noted the expensive cut of the father's coat and the barely perceptible tremor in the mother's hand as she helped their daughter, Cora, from the carriage. This was not a case of local hardship. This was a transaction of a different order. In the main parlor, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax and dried lavender. Sister Helena moved with a serene, practiced grace as she poured tea into delicate china. The Ashton family sat stiffly on a velvet settee. Their urban sophistication appeared fragile in the rustic setting. Cora Ashton kept her gaze locked on her own hands, her knuckles white where they were clenched in her lap. Her father did all the speaking. His voice was a low, urgent murmur. He described a desired outcome, a complete erasure of rebellious thoughts and the memories that fed them. He wanted a daughter returned to them, docile and compliant. Finch listened with an air of detached professionalism. He explained their methods using a vocabulary of spiritual realignment and mental tranquility. This language was crafted to soothe and to obscure. The true mechanics of the work, the precise surgical interventions, remained unmentioned. He was not selling a medical procedure. He was selling peace of mind, and the Ashtons were willing purchasers. The negotiation was swift. The sum Finch named was astronomical, a deliberate test of their commitment. The Ashton patriarch agreed without a moment's hesitation. He produced a heavy leather purse that landed on the side table with a definitive thud. The transaction was concluded with a chilling efficiency. As the family stood to leave, their relief was a tangible force. They departed without a single glance back at the young woman they were leaving behind. The moment the door clicked shut, the room's atmosphere transformed. The pretense of compassionate care vanished entirely. Cora Ashton was now simply a subject, a problem to be resolved. Sister Helena's serene smile dissolved into an expression of cool, clinical assessment. Later, in the surgical theater, the air was cold and carried the sharp scent of antiseptic. Cora was secured to the steel table, her breathing fast and shallow. Dr. Finch reviewed the detailed notes her family had provided. His finger traced a line describing her unruly intellectual independence. He spoke to Mr. Theron Gray not about a person, but about a technical specification. He indicated the exact neural pathways requiring alteration, his instructions as precise as an engineer's diagram. Gray's hands moved with a calm, mechanical certainty as he selected tools from a tray. The procedure was one of fine calibration. A low, rhythmic hum filled the room, punctuated only by their brief, professional exchanges. Finch observed closely, but his focus was on the process itself, the subtle physiological feedback. He made notes in his folio, recording data points. The woman on the table was merely the medium for their work. When it was over, Cora's eyes opened. The defiant spark that had been there was completely gone. In its place was a placid, empty calm. A faint, agreeable smile touched her lips, a perfect replica of the expression her father had specified. Finch made a final notation. A silent look of professional satisfaction passed between the two men. The product had been delivered exactly as ordered. Alone in his study, Dr. Finch composed his report. His pen moved with the same precision he applied to his work. He documented the successful eradication of Cora's rebellious spirit in a detached clinical tone, emphasizing the behavioral outcomes. He made no reference to the individual she had once been. He included meticulously detailed anatomical drawings, mapping the incisions with an artist's care. He sealed the documents in a thick parchment envelope using a dollop of dark red wax. A courier appeared silently in the doorway, a man accustomed to discreet errands. Finch handed him the package with instructions for delivery to a specific research society in Vienna. The man nodded, his payment already arranged, and melted back into the shadows. Days later, a reply arrived, adorned with foreign postage. The letter, from the society's secretary, praised the exceptional quality of Finch's submissions. It expressed a particular and keen interest in subjects who exhibited what they termed heightened intellectual resistance. The society formally requested more such cases, underscoring their unique value for pioneering research into the neurology of human will. Finch read the words not as a moral question, but as the highest form of professional validation. This was an invitation to broaden his ambitions, a confirmation that his remote work carried significant weight on an international stage. He felt a quiet, profound sense of pride, entirely separate from the human cost. The letter was not a warning. It was a catalyst for expansion. The carriage door closed with a final heavy sound. Elara Vance stood alone on the gravel drive, the noise of its departure quickly fading into the vast, silent grounds. The building before her was a formidable mass of grey stone. Its narrow, evenly spaced windows resembled the bars of a cage. She took a slow breath, but the air held no scent of nature, only a faint, clean odor of lye soap carried on the wind. A woman glided toward her, her movements unnaturally smooth and quiet. She introduced herself as Sister Helena, her voice a low, practiced murmur. Elara's attention immediately went to the woman's hands. They were immaculately clean, the nails cut short and straight, better suited to handling instruments than beads. It was a small detail, but Elara filed it away as significant data. Sister Helena led her inside. The entrance hall was cavernous, with floors polished to a cold, hard shine. The air held a subtle metallic undertone, like that of old blood or chemical preservatives, poorly disguised by the pervasive scent of soap. The sister spoke softly of tranquility and spiritual realignment, her words a gentle stream about finding inner peace. Ilara listened, her mind automatically translating the euphemisms. Purification meant the removal of unwanted traits. Realignment suggested a forced correction. This was not a refuge, it was a facility. They entered a smaller room with stark white walls. Ilara's eyes instantly noted the reinforced hinges on the inner door and the small, discreet latch that could only be operated from the outside. Sister Helena continued her placid monologue, but Elara was no longer listening to the words, only to the intent behind them. The sister offered a thin, tranquil smile. "Our only wish is to guide you toward peace," she said. Ilara met her gaze directly, her own expression carefully neutral, a silent, absolute decision solidified within her. She would not be guided, she would observe. Later, Elara sat perfectly still in a cold, hard-backed chair. The room was a clinical space, all sharp angles and sterile surfaces. Dr. Finch moved around her with a quiet, assessing precision, his eyes missing nothing. Sister Helena sat nearby, a picture of serene patience. She began the formal assessment with gentle questions about Elara's state of mind and her relationship with spiritual authority. Elara answered with a polite but firm defiance. She turned the sister's own inquiries back on her, questioning the moral foundation of compelled obedience. Her words were chosen to expose the logical flaws in the institution's philosophy. Sister Helena's serene mask did not slip, but a new tension appeared around her eyes. Dr. Finch observed the exchange with detached fascination. He interrupted, his voice clinically sharp. He posed a complex question about the vascular structure of the brain, using terminology found only in advanced medical texts. Elara did not hesitate. She answered with perfect accuracy, then expanded upon his point with a sophisticated corollary about neurological function. Her voice was steady and clear. A heavy silence descended upon the room. The clinical atmosphere shifted, growing charged. Dr. Finch's gaze was no longer merely assessing. It was analytical, almost hungry. He glanced at Sister Helena, a brief look that communicated a great deal. This subject was different. Her resistance was not simple rebellion. It was rooted in deep knowledge, making her both a profound threat and an unparalleled research opportunity. The goal was no longer correction. It was comprehensive study. Ilara was escorted back to her room, a small cell where the stone walls seemed to radiate cold. She sat on the edge of the thin cot, the rough blanket providing little warmth. In the profound quiet, she replayed every detail. The antiseptic smell on the attendant's robes, the specific questions about her medical training, the sound of heavy doors sealing shut. This was a place of science, not faith, a laboratory in disguise. From somewhere deep within the building came a rhythmic, metallic clanking, the sound of a system moving on its cold, efficient schedule. It was followed by the definitive thud of a bolt sliding home. Then, a faint, choked cry echoed for a mere moment before being abruptly cut off. The sound was a brutal confirmation, a stark truth that settled in her chest. Her hands, resting calmly on her knees, tightened almost imperceptibly. They saw her as a specimen, a fascinating problem to be solved, but her mind was her only weapon. She would observe. She would learn their methods. She would find a weakness, a quiet, ferocious energy ignited within her. They intended to study her defiance. They would get more than they bargained for. In the oppressive stillness, a plan began to form, a silent rebellion forged in the cold certainty of her situation. A furious storm descended upon the stone sanctuary, its rage shaking the very foundations. Rain lashed against the windows with a relentless drumming that echoed through the high-ceilinged corridors. Water began seeping under exterior doors, darkening the flagstones of the lower levels and creating a palpable sense of alarm among the staff. The institution's usual quiet control shattered into frantic activity. Practitioners scrambled, their faces etched with a new urgency as they moved equipment and rolled heavy cabinets to higher ground. Their attention, normally a focused and pinning force upon Elara, had completely dissolved into the chaos. Elara became an observer in the turmoil. She stood at the edge of the rushing current of panic, a still point. This disorder presented a critical opportunity, a crack in the institution's perfect facade. Near a junction, where a lesser-used corridor branched into darkness, she saw her moment. Several practitioners struggled with a waterlogged medical chest, their backs turned. With a slow, deliberate step, she slipped into the shadowy passage. The roar of the storm faded behind her, replaced by an oppressive silence. The air grew noticeably colder, carrying a faint, acrid scent she recognized from dissection halls. A heavy door stood slightly ajar, as if someone had been interrupted in their work. Elara slipped through the narrow opening and descended a narrow staircase carved directly from the bedrock. The room at the bottom was a place of chilling order. A single lamp cast long shadows across a central table of polished steel. Glass jars lined shelves, their contents suspended in clear liquid. Her medical knowledge allowed for no misinterpretation. These were anatomical specimens, preserved human brains showing precise, deliberate excisions. The horror here was not one of gore, but of cold, scientific calculation. A small desk stood against one wall. Her hands, steadied by a grim purpose, sorted through its contents. She found ledger books bound in dark leather. The pages were filled with meticulous script, a clinical record of atrocity. Patient codes were listed next to procedures. Terms like temporal lobe ablation were noted alongside observations on behavioral changes. One ledger contained financial records. It detailed payments received from academic institutions in Edinburgh and Vienna for what were blandly termed research specimens. The final piece of the terrible puzzle clicked into place. This was not merely a prison, it was a factory, systematically dismantling minds and selling the results as scientific progress. Her fingers moved with swift efficiency, selecting specific pages that told the clearest story. One detailed a complete neurological history, charting a subject's transformation from a rebellious individual to a placid shell. Another was a receipt for a substantial payment, specifying the desired outcome of docility and memory suppression for a patient from a prominent family. She folded the papers into a thin, flat packet. Slipping them inside her dress, she felt the slight weight settle against her ribs. It was more than paper. It was a physical manifestation of the institution's crimes. Possessing it changed everything. She was no longer just a prisoner seeking escape. She was a witness carrying evidence, and that made her survival an absolute necessity. A sound echoed from the staircase, the scuff of a boot on wet stone. Voices followed, growing clearer. The practitioners were returning, their emergency task above completed. Panic threatened to seize her, but it was quickly mastered by a sharp, cold clarity. There was no time to retreat the way she had come. She moved to the door and peered into the corridor. The flickering light of a lantern drew nearer. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out, and began walking away from the hidden theater, forcing her steps into a calm, measured pace. Two figures passed her, their attention fixed on the door she had just exited. They offered only a curt nod, their minds already on securing the room. She continued down the hall, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the hidden papers. Each beat was a reminder that her escape was no longer a desire, it was an imperative. Ilara's breath hitched as the guard glanced away toward a commotion in the courtyard. This fleeting distraction was her only chance. Her movements were quick and quiet, fueled by desperation. She grabbed the heavy water bottle from the washstand. She struck with surgical accuracy, targeting the base of his skull. It was not meant to kill, only to incapacitate. The man let out a soft grunt and slid down the wall into a heap on the floor. She did not pause to check his condition. Her attention flew to the loose floorboard beneath her cot. Kneeling, she pried it up with frantic fingers. The oilcloth-wrapped documents were still safe. She tucked the packet deep inside her dress, the crinkle of paper loud against her thumping heart. The cold night air hit her as she slipped past the doorway. A sliver of moon cast faint light, offering shadows for cover. She sprinted across the wet grass, her soft shoes silent. The institution's high walls stood ahead, but she remembered a section weakened by the recent storm. She scrambled over the crumbling stones, scraping her palms raw. A disorganized shout echoed from behind, distant and confused. She dropped into the thick undergrowth on the other side, the forest swallowing her whole. The immediate pursuit sounded clumsy, the noise fading behind the wall. She did not stop running. Her flight was a desperate drive away from the stone prison and into the unknown. Crossing the boundary brought no relief. She had traded a cage for a vast, indifferent wilderness. Ilara pushed deeper into the woods, branches tearing at her clothes. Her lungs burned, but the sound of organized pursuit drove her forward. These were not local men. Their movements through the trees were methodical, the sign of professionals. She used the rocky terrain to her advantage, scrambling over outcrops and wading through a shallow, icy creek to mask her trail. The first day faded into a bitterly cold night. Huddled under a rocky ledge, she shivered uncontrollably. Old injuries flared with a fresh, gnawing pain. Hunger was a dull ache, but thirst was sharp and constant. She allowed herself only a few sparing sips from her leather water pouch. During a moment of cover in a thicket, she dared to examine the stolen documents. Her numb fingers smoothed the damp pages. The clinical script revealed a cold commercial enterprise spanning decades. She saw payment lists from wealthy families, bulk orders for surgical tools, and precise accounts of procedures. One entry noted a successful lobotomy for a client as far away as Boston. The horror was not just in the act, but in its transactional nature. This was no rogue asylum. It was a factory of human alteration, and she held its ledgers. The chilling realization settled deep within her, a cold weight that hardened her resolve. She carefully tucked the papers away. She had to survive. The truth demanded it. By the third day, a fever gripped her. Her body swung between violent chills and burning heat. Each step was a monumental effort. The forest seemed to sway and tilt around her. The low rumble of a river grew into a roar. Breaking through the final line of trees, she faced a wide, churning expanse of gray water. It was the final barrier. On the other side lay a settlement road and a faint chance of salvation. Her hope faltered. The current was powerful, dragging debris downstream with violent force. Then, carried on the wind, came the distinct sound of voices. They were closer now, their words muffled but their intent clear. The hunt was closing in. There was no alternative. She clutched the oilskin pouch tight against her chest. Wading into the biting cold water was a shock that briefly cleared her feverish mind. She pushed forward, the current immediately pulling at her. Midway, the water reached her chest. A misstep on a slippery rock sent her stumbling, and for a terrifying moment she was submerged in the silent, dark rush. Her hand tightened convulsively around the precious documents. Somehow, she found her footing again, gasping and coughing. She fought her way forward, inch by agonizing inch, muscles screaming. Just as her strength was about to give out, the water shallowed. She dragged her battered, trembling body onto the gravel bank, collapsing in a heap of exhaustion. Pushing herself up onto her elbows, she scanned the opposite tree line. Movement caught her eye. A figure emerged from the shadows, then another. They had reached the riverbank. They stood there, watching her, their pursuit now forced into the open. Her gaze lifted beyond them, scanning the distant fields. There, a mere speck on the horizon, was the dark shape of a farmhouse, a final, desperate goal. She forced her aching body to stand, every movement a protest, and began to stumble toward it, leaving the wilderness and its hunters behind. Ilara Vance stood dripping before the sheriff's desk, a stark contrast to the tidy room. Mud flaked from her boots onto the clean floorboards. Her shivering frame and the desperate grip she kept on a bundle of papers were the only signs of life she seemed to have left. The sheriff glanced up from his own orderly reports. His expression was one of practiced indifference. He saw a woman from the wilderness, probably with a complaint about a missing animal or a property dispute. He motioned for her to begin, already preparing a dismissive answer. Her voice was raw and thin. She spoke of the stone building on the hill, but she did not call it a sanctuary. She described it as a place of calculated cruelty hidden behind polished walls. The sheriff interrupted with a weary sigh. He mentioned the institution's respectable benefactors and their commendations from prominent eastern cities. He spoke of the spiritual guidance offered there, a service to the community. Ilara's words grew sharper and more precise. She used terms like surgical theater and medical ledger. She described procedures that had nothing to do with salvation. Then her composure broke. She thrust the documents onto the desk with a sound that cracked through the quiet room. These were not the scribbled notes of a disturbed mind. They were official records, filled with precise script and stamped with unfamiliar European seals. The language was coldly clinical, detailing experimental techniques and corresponding financial payments. The sheriff picked up the top sheet. His eyes scanned the stock descriptions. The wary skepticism on his face drained away, replaced by a slow and chilling understanding. He looked at Ilara again, truly seeing the feverish determination in her eyes. She was not a nuisance. She was a witness to a profound evil. After ensuring Ilara was resting in a back room, the sheriff sat alone. The fire crackled, its light dancing over the damning papers. He sent a young deputy to fetch Dr. Julian Moss. He requested a consultation for a medical matter, offering no further details. Dr. Moss arrived with his usual professional haste, medical bag in hand. His demeanor was one of mild, polite concern until he entered the office. His eyes moved from the sheriff's grim face to the scattered documents and finally to the closed door. The sight seemed to strike him physically. His shoulders tightened visibly. The sheriff did not ask for a story. He pointed a firm finger at specific ledger entries. He asked about surgical methods that promised impossible recoveries. He questioned the use of medical terminology that contradicted every public assurance the sanctuary had ever made. Under this direct and factual assault, The doctor's confidence fractured. He looked at the floor. His answers became evasive, his voice using its authoritative tone. He attempted to explain it all as pioneering therapeutic work, but the words rang hollow. The man's rationalizations collapsed into dust. In a hushed and broken voice, he confessed. He admitted his role was to provide a cloak of legitimacy. The European founders, he revealed, were not esteemed colleagues. They were exiles, men whose medical licenses had been revoked for venturing into territories of experimentation that ethical medicine forbade. The weight of his own participation finally crushed him. With dusk settling outside, the sheriff remembered an old report filed away years prior. He sent for Silas Croft. The woodsman entered quietly, his large frame dominating the doorway. His gaze went immediately to the documents, then to the sheriff. A grim understanding settled on his weathered features. The sheriff pushed the papers toward him. He asked if these records finally gave substance to the strange sights Silas had reported long ago, the things dismissed as superstition. Silas studied the pages, his jaw working silently. He gave a single, slow nod. The testimony he had offered as a younger man was no longer the rambling of a frightened hunter. It was a crucial piece of a horrifying puzzle. All hesitation left the sheriff. His voice was low and firm as he announced the plan. At first light, he would lead a party to raid the institution. The time for questions was over. Silas Croft stood straighter, a long-awaited vindication hardening his resolve. From the other room, Ilara felt a fragile hope pierce her exhaustion. The night would be long, each moment stretched taut with the anticipation of the coming dawn. They would march up the hill and confront the truth within the stone walls. The pre-dawn air held a sharp bite as the sheriff's party assembled in the town square. Sheriff Bellamy moved with a stiff efficiency, checking firearms and issuing low-toned instructions. The small group, a mix of deputies and grim-faced townsfolk, avoided looking at Elara Vance for too long. Her presence was a quiet rebuke to their previous inaction. Liam Croft stood beside his son Silas, the two men sharing a heavy, unspoken understanding. Years of dismissed warnings had led to this moment. They rode out in a silence broken only by the crunch of hooves on frozen ground. The journey felt unnaturally long. As the institution's silhouette emerged against the brightening sky, a collective tension gripped the riders. They had steeled themselves for a fight, for barred gates and armed resistance. The sight of the main gate standing slightly ajar was more disquieting than any show of force. It felt like an invitation into a tomb. Liam Croft was the first to dismount. He pushed the heavy gate open. Its low groan echoed across the impossibly quiet grounds. The gravel paths were perfectly raked, showing no sign of recent passage. The sheriff moved past him, his expression hardening. He muttered that this silence felt more threatening than any shouted curse. The men spread out cautiously. Their boots made soft, scuffing sounds on the pristine paths. The building's many windows were dark and vacant. Silas kept close to his father, his sharp eyes noting the geometric precision of the hedges, the utter lack of any disorder. The initial relief at meeting no resistance quickly curdled into a deeper dread. The place felt not just abandoned, but scrubbed clean of life. Inside, the living quarters were chillingly sterile. Every bed was made with military tautness. Every surface gleamed, free of even a speck of dust. One of the deputies ran a finger along a mantelpiece and found it spotless. He observed to no one in particular that it felt like a stage set after the actors had fled. The meticulous tidiness was a final, contemptuous gesture of control. The discovery of the hidden door was accidental. A deputy's hand brushed against a nearly invisible seam in the stone wall. The panels swung inward without a sound, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the mountain. A wave of cold, damp air flowed up to meet them, carrying a faint, acrid scent of chemicals. The air grew colder as they went down. The walls were slick with moisture. They emerged into a vast, circular chamber. Stone benches rose in tiers, facing a central table of polished slate. A single shaft of light from a high window illuminated a trolley of surgical instruments. The tools were arranged with a chilling neatness, their sharp, strange shapes glinting. This was no scene of chaotic violence. It was a place of cold, calculated purpose, and its silent order was profoundly horrifying. Liam moved to a heavy door on the far side of the theater. The room beyond was a repository. Shelves lined the walls, holding rows of glass jars. Each contained a pale, suspended specimen preserved in clear fluid. The air was thick with a sweet, cloying chemical smell. A large cabinet with many drawers stood against the far wall, each drawer neatly labeled. He pulled one open. It was filled with papers. He lifted the top sheet. His breath caught. He recognized the name immediately. It was the miller's sister, a woman sent away for melancholy years ago. The record described a surgical procedure in dispassionate, technical language. He read another name, then a third. Each was a local woman, a neighbor. The clinical entries detailed interventions meant to subdue the mind and spirit. The scale of it began to dawn on him. The cabinet held hundreds of drawers. A simple, dreadful calculation suggested over 600 souls had passed through this cold machinery. The horror was not in the bloodshed, but in the dry facts on the page, the meticulous handwriting that documented a sustained atrocity. The weight of this knowledge settled heavily on the men. They were no longer just investigators. They had become witnesses to a truth that would forever redefine their world. The silence in the room was immense, broken only by the soft rustle of a page as Liam slowly closed the drawer. The perpetrators were gone, but their work remained, a permanent stain on the valley's conscience. The real confrontation would not be with people, but with the uncomfortable truth of what their community had allowed to happen in plain sight. The meeting house felt close and airless. Sheriff Bellamy presented the facts with a flat, deliberate tone. He stripped the horror of its heat, leaving only cold geometry. Surgical theaters, preserved specimens, records, numbering over 600. The Caldwells and the Ashtons sat rigid among the others. Their faces were masks of shared dread. They were confronted with a terrible equation. Truth meant a public scandal that would stain their family names for generations. Silence offered a quiet settlement and a cover story about a tragic fire. A heavy silence settled over the room. The shame of their initial complicity warred with a deep, pragmatic desire for closure. An older man, Mr. Caldwell, finally spoke. He declared they would bury this knowledge with their children. It was not a suggestion, but a statement of the room's collective will. A wave of bitter relief washed through the assembled families. It was an uncomfortable feeling. The magistrate's pen scratched across a ledger page, sealing the official record. Justice had been weighed against social standing, and the latter won. They filed out into the dusk, each carrying the heavy secret back to their homes. A few days later, Elara Vance walked the settlement's main street. The morning sun did little to warm her. The physical scars from her ordeal had faded, but the memory of the surgical theater remained vivid. She saw Liam Croft outside his blacksmith shop. the rhythmic hammering was a sound of normal, untroubled life. She felt compelled to approach him, needing to share the weight she carried. She described the clinical precision she had witnessed, the systematic nature of the work. Liam did not look up from the glowing iron on his anvil. He spoke softly about the community's need for peace. He talked of the necessity to move forward. His words were a gentle but firm dismissal. He mentioned in passing that Dr. Moss had left for the East. His reputation was damaged, but his freedom remained intact. Later, inside Liam's shop to buy nails, Alara overheard two merchants. They were discussing newly arrived medical journals from Europe. They spoke with admiration of a Dr. Finch. His research was being hailed as groundbreaking. The very notes she had risked her life to expose were now circulating in legitimate circles. Their horrific origins had been scrubbed away, leaving only valuable data. A cold understanding settled over Ilara. The world had not rejected the truth. It had simply refined it, discarding the humanity and keeping the results. She was now the sole keeper of the complete, ugly story. A year later, Silas Croft made the arduous journey back to the institution. The path was softened by disuse. The forest was reclaiming its territory with quiet determination. The stone foundations remained, but nature was weaving a new tapestry over the grim masonry. Thick vines climbed the walls. Young trees grew from cracks in the stonework. Birds nested in the broken eaves. He walked through the empty space where the great door had been. Inside, the floor was a carpet of moss and decaying leaves. Sunlight fell through holes in the roof, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. There was no sign of the cells or the surgical theater. The forest had performed its own cleansing, erasing the man-made horrors. Silas understood that the stones were the only true witnesses. They had absorbed every sound and every silent plea. While people chose to forget, the stone would remember. It would hold the truth long after the last person who knew the story was gone. He knelt by a section of the foundation wall that was still clear of growth. From his pack, he took a single, smooth river stone. He placed it carefully at the base of the wall. It was a small, solid weight against the great void of forgetting. It was a memorial for no one but himself. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the clearing to its long, patient silence.